A CRM is not going to come in and magically solve all of the problems or the holes in your business that you may have or you may think you have, right? It's not some saving grace that's going to come in and make all the problems going away. It's meant to be a tool. And a tool, when used correctly and efficiently, like you said, can turn into the backbone of your business and make the way you run your business extremely efficient and productive. But it's not some save-all grand tool that's going to come in and plug all the holes that are in your business. It's meant to be an add-on and a supplement to, at the end of the day, what really needs to happen: talking to people, following up with people, and converting leads.
Hey there, guys. Welcome back to the Pursuit of Property podcast. I am sitting here on a beautiful, sunny Tuesday afternoon with my co-host, Cade. Cade Barrett, how are you, brother?
Dude, I'm doing good. I am missing my can of caffeine this afternoon, but that's okay. We're going to power through. I think we've got a great pod today, but doing good nonetheless.
Dude, it's nice to finally be out of the rain. It's been pouring.
Dude, I know. And I think we're only getting a little bit of sunshine before it's back to clouds and rain.
Is it really?
Yeah.
You just ruined my day. So we're going to be going through step 2, episode 2 of our short series on the, what do we call it? Basic building blocks?
The building blocks of your business.
The building blocks of your business. We started this series because we had a great conversation a few podcasts ago about how the different portions in your business need to be in harmony in order to create consistent success. So we talked last episode about the marketing piece of a business.
Yep. And finding leads. We talked about outbound versus inbound. Basically everything from starting from zero all the way up to when you have a lead ready to be put into the CRM. And that's where we're taking it off and kicking off today.
Yeah. Well, I guess let's start. What's a CRM?
Dude, a CRM is a customer relationship manager. And one of the big ones that most people have heard of, whether you're in real estate or not, obviously Salesforce is kind of the big name that's always thrown around, right? But in terms of real estate specific CRMs, as with most things, there are a whole bunch of them to look and to choose from. It can be really confusing too, because for the most part, they are not free. And if they are free, they are very limited in their scope.
Yeah. I think the biggest thing to understand about a CRM is the CRM is kind of what I would call, in a sales position, your playground. It's the area you spend the majority of your time. It houses a ton of data. That data goes from information about the property to your notes from your conversations, and depending on what CRM you're using and how you're using it, it can house recordings, documents, photos, deal analysis. It could have a lot. So your CRM is the backbone of your sales funnel. It kind of is like the guiding light on keeping track of every single person you're talking to.
100%. And I think we've had this important conversation, and it's important to preface this with, a CRM is not going to come in and magically solve all of the problems or the holes in your business that you may have or you may think you have, right? It's not some saving grace that's going to come in and make all the problems going away. It's meant to be a tool. And a tool, when used correctly and efficiently, like you said, can turn into the backbone of your business and make the way you run your business extremely efficient and productive. But it's not some save-all grand tool that's going to come in and plug all the holes that are in your business. It's meant to be an add-on and a supplement to, at the end of the day, what really needs to happen: talking to people, following up with people, and converting leads.
Yeah, a shovel's not going to dig without your input.
Exactly.
Right? But it's a lot easier to dig with a shovel than with a hand. I want to also talk, like, a lot of people who haven't done a deal before, the way that they handle leads is so different than a business. You know, they're usually writing down notes in their notes app on their phone, or they have a scratch piece of paper they're writing down a name and a phone number to. The value of having a CRM is scale, right? And that's the other portion to your CRM, is understanding that if you want to do one deal a month consistently, you need to have a lot of people you're talking to. And the human brain can't remember all the different people, situations, things that were said when I talked to them last. And so a CRM kind of helps you organize who you've talked to, when you talk to them, and when you need to contact them again.
100%. So if we're taking the handoff from part one of this mini series, with talking about finding leads, boom. Okay, at this point, somebody has decided on their marketing channel. They've let the marketing go. Boom, they either get an incoming call or they've talked to somebody on an outbound call, and they have a lead, somebody who's ready to now be put into the next stage of running a real estate investment business. So what happens, or what does somebody do when they now have this lead and it's now needing to be put somewhere with an item tasked for follow-up?
I think there's a step prior to that. The very first thing you need to do is talk to the client and decide whether or not they're a lead or not. I think, you talk to so many people when you're new that you think are leads that aren't. And I think we should make a clear line here, because without a clear process or decision chart, a lot of people are going to waste a lot of time on non-legitimate sellers.
100%.
Right? So in the last episode, we talked about we're looking to talk to sellers, meaning people who own property in the market that we buy in, that have a reason to sell at a discounted price, right? If you're an investor, you're not looking for listings, then you're going to get a lot of calls from people looking who may be open to selling, but they want the retail price with the ease of a cash sale. And I would want to clarify that you don't want to spin your wheels on that, because there's a lot more of those than there are real investor sales.
100%. And you may be asking, okay, how do I know if somebody is willing to potentially sell their home at a discount? And I think the main things we focus on, we call them the pillars, right? And
the 4 pillars.
These are the pillars you are trying to fact find when you're having a conversation with a prospect to see if they are in fact a lead. And those pillars are, one, you mentioned one already, is price. Is somebody willing to sell their home at a price that is at a discount and cheaper than, what they might fetch on the open market? So price being one of them. Motivation. Are there any pain points? Are they in pre-foreclosure? Are they going through a divorce? Have they owned this property for a long time and it's got a ton of deferred maintenance and they can't afford to go in and fix up the property, right? Condition, another big one. Actually ties into what I just said there too. Condition is the property, run down at all, inside, outside, anything like that. I've already lost my train of thought. What are the timeline, right? Again, using the foreclosure example, and I think we'll have a good deal review coming for you guys in a couple of weeks. But timeline, do they need to sell ASAP in order to avoid foreclosure, in order to put a little bit of money in their pockets? Do they need to sell ASAP to take the money and pay for, emergency medical bills or anything else? Is there anything pushing their timeline for when they're needing to sell sooner rather than years down the line?
Yeah, that pretty much sums it up. I would say, as somebody who's trained a lot of people on this, in order of importance, the most important thing to know on that first phone call is, why are you thinking about selling? So motivation is your most important point. The second most important point is going to be price. And that is because if they're asking a price that does not make sense, it does not matter necessarily if the condition or timeline match up. Now, don't get hung up on that. The other 2 things to help identify if the price is negotiable could be timeline, like you mentioned, and condition being last. We buy properties in any condition. That's what our marketing says. We've bought homes that need just paint and floors. We've bought homes that need to get completely rebuilt. So the price is obviously going to change depending on the condition. But really, if I were to hone in on one thing, and if I were in your shoes, I would focus, why is the seller thinking about selling? The better you understand that, the better chance that you have at deciding if they're a real legitimate investment deal or if they're just a tire kicker.
So if we're using these pillars as essentially a criteria to decide if a prospect is worth calling a lead and putting into some sort of system to follow up on or to check in on, should they be matching a certain number of the pillars? How does that disqualification process happen when you're trying to see if a prospect is in fact a legitimate lead?
It depends on where you're at in your business. If you're new, I'd recommend getting in reps, and I would be a little bit more lenient. If there is a motivation, I would plug them into your CRM, right? And that motivation could be very, very strong, or it could be fairly weak. I think when you're new, your goal should be talking to as many people that own real estate as possible. That's how you learn. And when you do get in that situation where you have a fire hot lead that has everything, you've already gotten in the reps, right? Jordan doesn't go out and play his first game of basketball. He practices, right? It's not like you wait until game time to start performing. If you are more experienced, the way that we typically handle it is we want to see 3 pillars, right? We want to have an understanding of the motivation. That has to be number 1. We are flexible sometimes on price. If it's an ask me, or if it's just give me a price, sometimes we won't take it. If the motivation's very high, we will take it. Timeline, we prefer to have stuff within the next 6 months. In a more ideal world, under 60 days. And then condition, we pretty much take anything. The main point about condition is that helps you understand what price you could offer. So my opinion is, if you're newer, be a little flexible. I would only disqualify if the motivation is not there. An 100%. Example of that would be, you called me, give me a price. And if they're not going to give you any help on anything, keep that seller and talk to them, but know that that's probably not a high priority lead for you.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people get really eager and get ahead of themselves when somebody says, oh yeah, well, I'd sell for the right price. Right. And I think it's important to note, and this comes with an important thing, like you said, is getting in the reps and getting in the practice, especially if you're a beginner or at the beginning of trying to set up this real estate investment business. Getting in the reps is important. And that's the only way you'll also hone in on being able to distinguish quickly if a prospect is in fact a lead, or if it's somebody who's not worth, talking to.
Right. So once you've had that initial phone call, ideally you've been taking notes. What you're going to input is going to be the seller's name, address, phone number, email if you got it, and then the 4 points of motivation. So, or 4 points, or 4 pillars: motivation, timeline, condition, and price. Now, the other things that you're going to add are going to be property square footage, bed bath count, lot size, pool or no pool, if they have solar or mortgages or anything that could affect the seller's net. And then you're going to add any notes that you heard. I want to try to explain this in a succinct way. When writing down notes, it's better to overwrite than underwrite. I would rather see everything under the sun in the notes section than have no clue who this person is. A great example would be if they brought up family members or family members' names or pets' names. Those are all things that when you repeat those names back on the next call, it shows that you listen, right? So I always encourage people. I had a gal, she's 78. It was her birthday on February 6th. She turned 78. I set a follow-up call to call her back after her birthday, because nothing makes you feel more heard than when a person that you've only talked to twice calls you back and says, how was your birthday? Did you and Sophie, your dog, get to spend some time with the family? That shows that I listened in that last call, and it builds a sense of trust that you don't get when you don't take those notes and you call back and just say, hey, what's up with the house, right? So that would be the last thing I would input, is kind of general notes about the person and their situation and maybe who's helping them.
Dude, for rewind and listen to that back at slow speed to make sure you guys can get down all of those points that you just talked about. Because I think if you could take those set of notes on every call, your rapport building as you get in the reps is only going to freaking skyrocket. And I think you set yourself up for more success on those phone calls when you collect and fact find all of that information and have it readily accessible. I think the only other thing, and it's low priority, but it's always good to get if you can, or if it's easily accessible, which it is on a lot of different platforms, is their mailing address if it's different than the property address. especially if you have a meaningful conversation with them. And it could be at any point in your follow-up process, maybe even beginning, right? Right when you intake the call and you're converting them from a prospect to a lead, just doing a quick little handwritten note, being able to write that real quick takes you 30 seconds to a minute, throw it in a little envelope, throw a stamp on it, and mail it off to their mailing address. That's also another personalized note. Recap something of importance or something, of high priority from that conversation in your note, just again, to your point, to show that you are listening, that you care. And that's just another personalized touch and another thing to put in front of this person as you continue to follow up with them.
Yeah, tying back to the marketing episode as well, I want you to take note of what marketing source drew in the phone call and which list you were talking to, whether it was cold calling or direct mail that brought in that. You need to know what lists are working so that you are only spending money on campaigns that work.
100%. Really important.
We're in the CRM. We've input the lead. What I want you to do next is to create a new task. There's going to be a recurring theme in how you handle follow-up. Task, complete task, take notes, create new task. So it's a 4-step process. Every time you start a task, take notes, create a new task, take notes, create a new task, and that's forever, in perpetuity, until the deal is closed, right? There should never be a time that your lead does not have a to-do. The only time that happens is when they say, nope, we're done, don't contact me. They sell to another investor, or you close the deal. And even then, there's a lot of people that say you don't drop that lead.
100%.
So I want you, whenever you hear us say completing a task, just know that that involves doing the actual job, taking note of what you did, and then creating another follow-up task.
Another good tie-in episode to the specific follow-up process we did way back in either 2020 or 2021. We did a full episode on how to handle follow-up in that follow-up process. That goes a whole episode in depth on how to handle that. And I think the important thing to note here is you can have generalized systems or processes to your follow-up, but there is no one-size-fits-all answer, and that's because each lead and each seller and each situation is going to be different. No two situations are ever the same, right?
I'll give 2 examples of that. One deal that we signed this month took us over a year of follow-up to sign. Another deal that we signed this month took approximately 2 days. So we can't give you like a one size fits all on how you handle a lead that's going to take a year versus a lead that needs something done today.
Well, and let me ask, what we can say is how often, if somebody's timeline is farther out like that, how often should I be talking to them as opposed to somebody who's ready to sign in less than a week?
Somebody who's ready to sign in under 30 days should almost be daily. A seller who's further out than 60 days, 60 to 90 days, that's probably every week. Somebody who's more than 90 days is probably every couple weeks. And somebody who's not really certain about selling is at least once a quarter.
Boom. And again, kind of having those general guidelines, but it's going to be based on, and you're going to have to make the executive decision as the person running your business and talking to these leads. Hey, okay, based on today's conversation, based on all the information I have on all the calls up until this point, and, the information you just gathered on that call, where should I put my next follow-up?
Next most logical time to contact them?
Boom. And there should never be any leads in your system that do not have a task set for follow-up. Again, and these may not even be in your system at this point, but any leads that are removed obviously are the exception, right? If they sold to somebody else, or they told you, hey, do not call me anymore, or whatever other reason, those may still be in your system, tagged as deleted, archived, dead, or whatever. Those do not need follow-up set in most cases, but every other lead in your system should always have a task set for next follow-up. There should be no empty, naked leads with no follow-up set.
Yeah. Let's talk about the different types of follow-up. There's calls, texting, mail, email, door knock, That's pretty
That
much
covers
it.
it.
Yeah. So what I want you to also do is when I'm thinking through what's the next most logical time to contact that person is what's the next most logical way to contact that person? If I'm talking to them actively, probably a call or text is easy.
Yeah.
But if I can't get a hold of them, do I need to go door knock them? Do I need to send them a letter in the mail saying, hey, did something happen? Can't get a hold of you? Things like that. So I want you to also be creative there. At the core, this business is a sales and marketing business. So I want you to know that the person who's most creative and effective in marketing is going to be the person that gets the deal.
100%.
Let's talk about how a lead moves through the sales funnel.
Let's do it.
So if you're on the YouTube video, I want you to look. A sales funnel is like any funnel. It starts wide and it gets narrow. At the top here, that's your marketing, right? You're gonna have tens of thousands of leads when you're running a full-time business. As you're working down, you're getting more and more qualified. And here at the bottom, at the smallest, most narrow part is where contracts get signed. So you need to prioritize people differently. The person that you just have their mailing address and that you just sent a piece of mail to is not as important as the person who's actively talking to you and saying, this is what I need, this is where it's at, I need to do it quick, right? So you need to keep that in mind and you need to organize your CRM as that. So what I want you to do is as you get a lead, I want you to tag it warm, hot, or cold, right? A cold lead is going to be the guy that just says, I'll sell it for the right price. Well, we know you have a property. We know we have the right phone number and we've talked to you, but you have no motivation, no price. We don't know anything really about condition and your timeline is not pressing. That would be a cold lead. A warm lead would be somebody kind of in between that and that seller that's ready to sign today. So they're going to have some idea of a motivation, some kind of a timeline. They have usually a price in mind, and usually the condition is somewhat known. Mm-hmm. And then a hot lead is going to be the person that says, I need to sell right now. I need to get this done. My house is in this kind of shape, and I'm willing to take this price. That's a hot lead. The timeline is the only one that's fairly consistent. It needs to be sub 60 days. If their timeline is longer than 60 days, then wait until it's closer to 60 days and change it from warm to hot.
Exactly.
As you're talking to sellers, you can change those tags. And the reason you have warm, hot, and cold is to know if I don't have enough time in the day to talk to everybody, who are the people I have to talk to? It's helping you prioritize.
Exactly. And it goes back to, again, the example you used on 2 of the deals we recently closed, right? Somebody who's ready to sell in less than a week, you're talking to them at least once a day, probably multiple times per day, right? And when we use this example of, hey, if you're in a jam, but you still need to make your calls, who do I prioritize? If they're not tagged in the system, again, you're going based off memory. Hey, tell the system, filter my hot leads, tell me who I got to call today, tell me who needs a check-in, and boom, you can focus on there. As opposed to the other example you used, hey, somebody's over a year out. Yes, they are hitting at least 1, 2, maybe a few of these other pillars, but their timeline's so far out, I don't need to be calling them every day. 1, because if it's a waste of time, and 2, you're going to be pestering the seller if their timeline's that far out and you're trying to call them more than you should be, right? So I think this tagging is super important, not only for your own reference, but also for the actual piece of communication when it comes down to it.
Yeah. Now that you have your leads tagged, you have your notes in, you have your follow-up started, now is kind of the actual sales process, right? The way that our team functions, and it's different for everybody, we're just going to tell you how we do it. We do an acquisitions call. That's going to be the very first conversation that's had. That's what gets our 4 pillars. Then we do what's called a deal analysis, right? In that, we take whatever information we know, plus whatever is available to us online. Usually how that looks is we pull it up on Google, we pull up the tax records, we look at the sales in the area, and we come up with an idea of what this home may be worth when we're done fixing it up. That is the ARV, after repair value. We work backwards from that after repair value. So from there, we take off holding costs, closing costs, commissions, repairs, any kind of potential fees that we may have to pay, any kind of trash that may need to get done, tenants that need to get moved out. We take off our profit, and that puts us all the way down to what we call our MAO, max allowable offer. What's important is to compare where's my max allowable offer compared to what they told me their price was. I recommend if you're in the beginning, take anything because again, you need to get in the reps of making low offers. But one way to know if this is a really hot lead is if their price and your MAO are close, treat that as a hot lead because you're willing to pay what they're willing to sell for. And if you're willing to pay it, somebody else is probably willing to pay it. So you do your deal analysis. Again, that's a task. You take notes, you write down all the numbers you accounted for, then you call the seller. And at that point, that's what we call our tier 2 acquisitions call. That call is usually used to pitch a range, right? What's a range? It's a negotiation tactic. Instead of giving them an explicit number, you say it's a ballpark of where I may end up, depending on a few different factors. Naturally, you're going to talk about those factors: timeline, occupancy, walking the property for condition. All those things play a part in what you've accounted for. So that tier 2 call is to find out more about the seller situation, understand what's going on, and to set a range just to see how that seller reacts. If they react positively, then your goal should be to prioritize getting in the home and getting it signed. If they react negatively, then it's understanding that this may be a little bit slower process and kind of assessing your follow-up as needed.
So up until this point, right? And for those of you guys who are watching, a lead is moving in this linear process, right? And they've gotten to this point where usually on this tier, like you called it, a tier 2 call, a range is typically pitched. And correct me if I'm wrong, if that in fact gets shut down by the seller in one way or another, right? The lead's been following this linear process. It then kind of takes a step back and it's placed on another follow-up, right? So it's been linear up until this point. If you get shot down or not really feeling crazy about that range and there's no other pressing issues to make sure to keep the lead moving forward, kind of moves that step back, right? But you pitch the range and the seller kind of takes it and either they're agreeable in that range and they verbally say, hey, yeah, that's, about in the ballpark of what I was thinking. That lead then keeps moving forward into the next stage of the process.
Right. So the next stage is the appointment stage. If you're new, and this is a trend, if you're new, do as many reps as you can. If you're more experienced, be a little pickier.
Yeah.
Our business, if you're within 50,000 of our range, we'll go on the appointment because we can't go to every house. But if you're within 50,000, we have full comfort that our team has the skills to bridge that gap.
Yeah.
If you're 100,000 off, is it really worth 2 hours of your time driving over to the property, talking to the seller and whatnot? If you have 30 to 40 leads at any point in time, you have to talk to. If you're newer and you don't have 30 or 40 people to talk to, go on the appointment. What's the worst that happens? Nobody else is going to go. You're there. You have a conversation and maybe you end up locking up a deal, right?
So, and the range is there. And you and the seller continue, the line's being moved. What is the purpose or the goal of going on this appointment?
This is a great point to make. The goal of you going on the appointment is 2 parts. The most important part is to build a relationship with the seller that makes you a human. You do not want to be another voice on the other end of the phone. You want to be Cade, the real estate guy I'm going to sell my house to. The second aspect of the appointment, and the less influential part, is documenting the condition of the home so that you can have a better understanding of what it will actually cost to fix it. If you could only do one, talk to the seller. If you can do both, which you should, get really, really, really good photos and videos of the home so that if you call a mentor or a friend in the business or a contractor or a realtor to get their opinion, they can see what you could see. Meaning you gave them photos of each room, photos of all the big ticket items like the roof, the HVAC, the water heater, the electrical panel. And then what I also want you to do is take a walkthrough video. And in that walkthrough video, talk about what you're seeing. Explain things that maybe aren't visually there. Does it smell weird? Is there a lot of traffic? Are we near the railroad tracks? Is there known issues that are non-visible, like the foundation is slanted, right? Document what you can so that when you get other people's opinions, they can give you good estimates, right?
Yeah. And the reason for this is you don't know, depending on how hard it was to get that appointment set in the first place or even get access to the property in the first place, if it's tenant occupied or otherwise, you never know if you're going to be able to get access again at any point in your negotiation with the seller. So all of those best practices need to be done if you do in fact have the chance to go through and take photos and video. You were just repeating this the other day. Another best practice as you're going through this, if you're on an iPhone and you're taking the walkthrough video, put it on 0.5 zoom. That takes your lens from this narrow all the way out here. So it gives you a better understanding of layout. It gets more of the house in this video you're trying to convey. And again, all of this is to have something to go back on in case you're not able to go out to the property again. So on the video, 0.5 zoom, even on the photos, 0.5 zoom, normal zoom as well. You want to, it's always better to have more than not enough, right? And I think that's the important part and understanding of this with photos and videos. Get everything or as much as you can.
Right. While you're at that appointment, there's two ways to go. If you're confident about your numbers, bring a contract and be ready to sign it. Bring a contract regardless.
Yeah.
If you're not confident about your numbers, then make sure you set the expectation with the seller that you're going to have to go back and talk with your contractor or your team or your partner to come up with a final figure. Expectation setting is important in a sales business because it helps everybody feel more confident about what will happen and then what's next. So what I want you to do is go on the appointment and talk to the seller. Become a human being. Understand their situation to the point where you can repeat it back to them without any issues. So what I'm saying is, if a seller is telling you that they need to sell because they need to go buy another property for their kid, this home has been a headache for them because it's vacant. They can't come up with the money to fix it themselves, and they really don't want to deal with a realtor, right? Those are things we hear all the time. I want you at the end of the appointment to say, you know, Cade, it was such a great time meeting with you. Thanks so much for letting me see it. You know, I'm definitely interested. I just got to talk with my partner a little more about what the final price I can pay you is. Sounds to me like, you know, you really don't want to get this thing listed. You probably don't have all the resources to get it fixed in a reasonable time, and just leaving it vacant any longer is a headache, and you've already got a property you want to buy. So I'd love to be the guy that ends up buying it from you. I'll take it as is, and you take that money and buy your kid a house. That way you guys move on from this, right? You want to get to the point where you can say that and the seller agrees with you. You don't want them to look uncomfortable or feel unheard. That's like the worst thing you can do here is not actually understand what they're trying to solve, because the only reason they're talking to you is because they have a problem to solve. So when you relay that whole story back to them, look at their face, see if they look uncomfortable, or ask, like, is that everything? Am I missing anything? See what they say. And then from there, say, great, I'm going to get you an offer. I'm going to call you back at X time to give you a final offer to get this done.
And people are more inclined to respond that way. One, when there's been rapport built, and two, the other important piece is when there's been trust built, right? Because when you're going on the appointment, right, you talked about the number one most important thing is building rapport with the seller. At this point, you should pretty much know the general story of the property, you know, what the general outline of the situation, right? So you should spend a little bit of time just clarifying and making sure, hey, this is in fact the situation. This is what's going on. But the rest of your time should not be spent talking about the house or talking about the situation that they're in, or, you know what I mean? You're trying to build rapport with that person as an individual.
What is rapport?
Rapport is, you could probably answer this question better than I could. I'm going to go on some generalized answer. Building, or what is rapport? I equate rapport to trust and likeness of the person on the other end of the table. It's making sure that you are building trust and making the other person feel understood.
I would say that's a very good way of saying it. My experience of rapport is like what I said earlier. Rapport is making yourself a human and creating a friendly relationship that makes it seem like this isn't a transaction, right? And if you're in this business, you should care about people. So building rapport, like you said, is creating a likeness with the other person. Please do not do that artificially and pretend you're into golf when you're not. But it's also what you said, trust. And trust comes from I share something vulnerable with you and you hear me and you respect me and you don't make me feel bad about it. And you're helping genuinely try to solve my problems.
Yeah.
Right.
How can you relate to the other person sitting on the other end of the table, right? Like you said, if a seller says they're into golf, don't pull shit out of your ass saying you're into golf, because then you build yourself down another rabbit hole to where, one, if you did play it off and you did in fact sound genuine, you leave it open for, if you know nothing about golf, the seller's now going to be going down and talking more and more about golf, asking you questions, right? Then you're going to find yourself exposed, right, for being disingenuous. So you are always going to be able to connect with the other person on the end of the table. It's figuring out where that connection is and making sure you're building on that genuine connection and not being disingenuous in any other way.
Yeah, I was going to say, it comes from genuine curiosity. And then the other thing we talk about a lot is open-ended questions.
Yeah.
Don't ask questions that can end with yes or no or, a one-word answer. Ask questions that require a little bit of elaboration because you get to find where you have similarities when you talk to somebody that way.
100%. Okay, so you're at this point, maybe, in this example we're using, you're going back and you're talking with your partner or your contractor or really just rerunning numbers to get this final number. Whether you're calling the seller back up or if you're lucky enough to meet them back out at the property for this final negotiation piece, what are some of the negotiation tactics or what's kind of the mindset going into, this final offer pitch to try and get a contract signed?
The first thing you have to do is re-explain the situation. So sales is storytelling. So like we did at the appointment, you're reiterating, Kate, it sounds like this property's been a real headache for you. You've had all these issues with it being vacant. I understand not wanting to work with a realtor. It sometimes can require repairs and commissions and extra fees. I want to confirm with you that my offer is going to be completely as is, and you're not going to have to pay any hidden fees. So I'll cover all that. That being said, I've done some more research about the property. When we were at the home, I noticed that there were these things needing to get repaired. And you can list off, the roof, the HVAC, all these things, right? Then say something along the lines of, I want to be the guy that buys the home from you so you can go buy your kid's house. And I appreciate you personally. And I think that this house is an opportunity for me if I can buy it for a price that makes business sense. When we last talked, you had mentioned that you're ready to get going. Help me understand, what's the price that you're willing to sell it for right now, right? Very often a seller is going to give you a higher price or they're going to ask you for a price. Regardless of what they say, you are going to pitch a range. So if your MAO is 120,000, your range may be 110 to 120. It may be 120 to 130. It may be 115 to 140. It doesn't really matter. That's where your decision-making process comes in. And then you say, is that a range that you're open to at this point? Depending on what the seller says, you're in classic haggling, right? You are the person that has to explain why your offer is where it's at. I'm taking on all these fees. The market's volatile. I have expenses when I hold properties because I'm not a millionaire's kid. So I end up borrowing money myself. These are the repairs and I got estimates for it. And this is how much it's going to cost me. And once you get to a price that the seller feels like you're being reasonable, at that point, you can start signing a contract.
And you're at the point now of signing a contract. And I'm going to say something again that we've seen time and time again, and I'll tie it back to the example we shared with the CRM, right? Too often, people who are wanting to get started in real estate investing get too in the weeds on trying to get all this information or all of the things they need up front. Hey, I haven't even placed my first phone call yet, but hey, Scott, hey, Cade, hey, whoever, can you get me a copy of the contract I need so I can have it ready to go? Hey, what CRM should I be having? I need to get in here and get it all set up. There is a time and a place for each of those things. Your number one focus should be, back in episode 1, finding leads. Because without leads, you do not have a business. Without leads, there's no use for a CRM. Without leads, there's no need to write up a contract because there's nobody to write up a contract for.
Listen to Keaton Gleason's episode.
Dude,
Keaton
yes.
talked explicitly about getting caught up and wanting a website and business cards and logos. And he was having a hard time because he didn't have people to talk to. Keaton changed his focus to talking to sellers, and he solved the other problems as they arose. And I want you guys to go back and listen to that because, frankly, like what Cade just said, unless you have a lead ready to sign a contract, you don't need a contract.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought up that example of Keaton because it's the epitome of exactly what we're talking about here, right? All right, you get all the way up to essentially where we're wrapping up here in part 2 of the building blocks of your business is officially getting that contract signed, right? You can either, if you are in person with the seller at this point, you have the copy, boom, you whip out that nice shiny pen, you get their John Hancock right there on the contract, and you do the same. Or
I thought that meant something else.
No. Or for whatever reason, you've negotiated the final price on the phone and you're sending it for some sort of e-signature. And now you have a fully signed, ratified contract. Congratulations.
That would be the epitome of the perfect sales process. Is a call comes in, you qualify, you underwrite, you call back, you set the appointment, you go on the appointment, you sign the contract. Those are going to be once in a blue moon. A majority of these are going to go back and forth between stages. Initial conversation, deal underwrite, pitch arrange, doesn't make sense. A few months later, they show interest again. You re-underwrite, you re-offer, or maybe you make an offer sight unseen. You keep going through the cycle until finally you come to a price that's agreeable, you sign a contract, and you move on.
Again, we jam-packed a lot going over, this second part, focusing on the sales process, in this 45 minutes. In the description, we're going to link some of the episodes that are supplemental and focus, take a whole topic and spend a whole episode talking about it. Again, one of those episodes way back when was how to handle, maybe bring some of that science and the magic the best we can to that follow-up process and go through more in-depth examples. The other one, we also did an episode early on, was how to handle your first appointment. We talked about it very briefly here, but we spend a whole 45 minutes going into how step-by-step to handle that first appointment. For those of you who are new or just beginning or just getting started, those episodes, in conjunction with this episode, if we're going, from start to finish on kind of a timeline-based thing on how to really build up your business, those 2 episodes, go listen, go watch them in congruency with this episode, and it's going to really help a lot as you're going through this process.
Also know that if you want to get consistent deals, you can't talk to one seller at a time. You need to be talking to 8 to 10 people, depending on how good you are at closing. Our team has a fairly high closing rate. Last quarter, I think we were at 38%. So we closed 38% of the leads that we talked to. When you're new, you're going to be a lot closer to 5 to 10%. And I want you to be okay with that. And just know it's a numbers game. So don't get caught up. You get one lead and then stop making your calls or answering your phone. Make sure that you are still adding to the top of your funnel, because not every person's going to make it all the way to a contract. And the biggest mistake I see in this portion is that a newer investor will get a lead, and that becomes everything they focus on for the next 2 weeks. And when that lead doesn't work, there's this emotional roller coaster of excitement followed by depression. What you need to understand is that it is all about who you're talking to. If you're talking to 8 to 10 people and one of your offers doesn't get accepted, you don't have that emotional roller coaster every day.
Yeah.
Because you realize, well, this house on Main Street didn't work out, but I still got the house on A, B, C, D, E, and F Street that are actively being worked, right? And every week you're adding to that funnel and you can get to the point where Cade and I have both managed 700 to 800 leads at a time, that's where you have to be doing 2 or 3 deals a month.
Absolutely. And you can listen and gather all this information, all you want, right? And it's about, at this point, taking action. And I think when we talk about part 1 and in today's episode, part 2, I think the important thing is to consider is you do not have to do it all on your own. In order to fast track this process, talk to people who are either ahead of you or even in the same boat as you, right? Collaborate, brainstorm, talk about how to handle this conversation or this conversation. If you're not comfortable going on the appointment yourself and you don't want to fumble, bring in somebody experienced, bring value to them, right? Bring value to somebody. Hey, I've got this great lead. I've got this appointment scheduled. They want to come check it out. I just love some assistance on this one just to be able to learn, right? You do not have to do it on your own. Collaborate, network, and you're going to be able to fast track this process a lot by doing that.
Especially if you're newer, your closing ratio is going to be quite a bit lower than somebody who's experienced. So you may not get that lead and make no money, or you'll have a better chance at getting it and making some of the money, right?
And learning how to do it in the process.
And seeing how to do it. So I think that's a great way if you're newer on how to bring value to more experienced investors is qualify leads, get to the point where it's ready to go get looked at and say, hey, would you come with me on this appointment?
Boom. Well, guys, this wraps up part 2 of our mini series on the building blocks of your business. We are going to kick off part 3 right where we left off today. So at the point of having a signed contract, what do you do now? We're going to get into opening escrow, what escrow even is, and just taking the ball another handoff to the next step. So stay tuned. That episode will be coming out next week. If you guys have any questions on part 1, part 2, any leads, any appointments you've got coming up where you guys want some assistance, you guys know we're always here to reach out. Please hit us up. We are here to help.
That's it. Don't celebrate yet. The contract's the start of it. So tune in. Right. We'll have this up. We'll have the next episode up in about a week or 2.
Boom.
All right, guys. See you next week.